On Thursday night, as we got that bonfire going with the help of Jerry Pinsker, who showed up with lots of dry wood, and we started the fire, and then the excitement as we started watching some of our families arriving for our family bonfire and seeing about 20 to 30 kids who I haven't seen throughout COVID just arriving and so excited to be back here at Bonai Shalom, back on their playground, back with their friends, back hearing songs played by Michael and hearing me tell a story and sitting in front of our magnificent building by the creek. And it was so joyful. And then later on, more and more people arrived and we sang and we had teachings and we talked about this special holiday of Lag BaOmer. And it was really, I would say, almost ecstatic, just the power of being back together in that way, and the power of celebrating this slightly mysterious holiday of Lag BaOmer. And then as we were having our celebration, the news was filtering through about what had happened in Israel, in Melon. And it was just so jarring, so shattering, so like, how can this experience that we're having be a celebration of the same holiday at which this terrible tragedy was unfolding? And it's given me a lot of food for thought. I mean, the extent of that tragedy, even though, to be honest, I think it was a tragedy waiting to happen for many years. Quite a few years ago, I actually went to Meron on Lag BaOmer, and the scene there is pretty chaotic, and I got out as soon as I could, to be honest with you. And so the fact that there were 100,000 people plus in a zone that had been permitted for 10,000 people max, and the fact that the people who were there were not prepared for the conditions that were there, from what I can understand, and certainly they were not masked in any way. It's an awful tragedy, and what's so awful about it, as I was reading the list of names and their ages, like how young so many of the people were who lost their lives. There were children as young as 8, and there were a lot of teenagers. There were a lot of people in their 20s, 9-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 45 people. I mean, obviously we can't underestimate the impact and the tragedy of such a loss of life. What is it about Lag BaOmer that makes people want to celebrate in this way? What is it about religious celebrations in general that have this energy of joyful celebration that can too often turn into tragedy? Think of the recent festival, the recent Hindu festival in India, which ended up being a terrible spreader for COVID-19, and is part of the reason why India is experiencing such a surge. It came from a deep desire to celebrate a religious festival. We think of the times that the Hajj, the great pilgrimage for our Muslim brothers and sisters, has turned into a similar scene of stampede and loss of life through the sheer extent of numbers wanting to celebrate these holidays. And if we look at this part of the Torah where we're talking about the calendar and talking about the importance of the holidays and talking about the importance of celebrating, especially in a time where celebrations have been so muted. That's a whole new word these days, isn't it? But the way that our celebrations have changed in their nature. What is it meant to look forward to time? We haven't known how things are going to turn out. We still don't know how things are going to turn out. On the one hand, we yearn to be together, but on the other hand, we're barely a minyan here this morning, even though we've opened up Bonai Shalom to have live services. So there's this great tension of wanting to celebrate together, wanting to celebrate Shabbat and celebrate the holidays and be together in community. And we see in all religious worlds, especially in the extreme forms of religion, people are willing to celebrate holidays at the risk of life. We've seen many outbreaks in churches, in evangelical churches that all along have been defying any of the CDC and their state guidelines, and just saying we're protected by a higher source. We have the blood of Jesus to protect us, or we have our Torah to protect us. And it's just a fundamentally, in my view, in my reading of tradition, it's a fundamentally un-Jewish way to be in the world, because Judaism very, very clearly values human life above all things. Pekuach nefesh, the saving of a human life, comes before any other mitzvah. And I think most people in the Jewish world have taken that very seriously. And unfortunately, some in the Jewish world have not taken that seriously at all. There's also a principle in Judaism that says, Al somchim ala nes. Don't rely on a miracle. Just because you have faith, just because you have a strong belief, just because you have a strong desire and a fervent desire and a passion to celebrate holidays, whatever your religion might be, it doesn't mean that the fact that you're going to celebrate that holiday is going to create a miracle and avoid terrible things happening, because we know that's not what happens. We know that's not true. The way in which that story turns out in the Talmud, a very tragic kind of story, where a young boy's father asked him to climb a ladder to go and chase a mother bird out of its nest to fulfill the mitzvah of shooing away a mother bird so you can take the eggs from the nest. And the ladder breaks and the boy hurtles to his death. And it's this story that makes Elisha ben Abuya, who is also known as Acher, a rabbi who became a great heretic, that's where he lost his faith. Because the Torah has exactly two mitzvot for which you are promised a long life. One of them is honoring your father and your mother, and one of them is shooing away a mother bird if you're going to take eggs from the nest. And this boy in the story in the Talmud was fulfilling both of these mitzvot, and he died as a boy. And so for Elisha ben Abuya, he couldn't stand that, and he gave up on the Torah. But for the other rabbis in the Talmud, they say, it was a bad ladder. It was a rickety ladder. It was dangerous. Al somchim al hanes. Don't rely on the miracle. Don't rely on the miracle. So as much as we want to fulfill all the mitzvot of Judaism, we want to live a vibrant Jewish life in community, we want to fulfill the Torah, we have to make sensible choices, and we have to keep ourselves and others safe. And we still have to do that. We're still doing that. And so as much as I'm heartbroken by that loss of life in Meron, there were just terrible risks that were taken on that day and every year, frankly, at Meron. Just to give you a sense of what Lag BaOmer is and how important the calendar is, I didn't want this to be a sort of downer words of Torah. I wanted to talk about the amazing qualities of our calendar, the way that the Torah describes it today. So what is Lag BaOmer? Some of us know, some of us don't know. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the world are going to know what Lag BaOmer is now because of what happened. But Lag BaOmer is not such a celebrated holiday. And there's so much beauty and depth to it. Rosalie read in the Torah, like count 7 weeks, count every day for 7 weeks. So we know from the second night of Pesach, and many of us do it at the end of our second Seder, we start this process of counting the Omer, counting these 7 weeks, these 49 days. Each week has a different significance and a meaning, and each day of each week has a different significance and meaning. And it's a very, very powerful ritual. It started as an agricultural ritual, counting between the barley harvest, which is associated with Pesach, with Passover, looking forward to the wheat harvest, which is celebrated at Shavuot. And every single day of those 49 days, the Kohen, the priest, would take an Omer, which is where the ritual comes from, an Omer, a measure of barley, and take it as a tenufa, as a wave offering. And that wave offering was like an embodied prayer saying, please, 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 may we have the right kind of moisture. May our crops grow. May we be able to feed our communities. May life be good. We're an agricultural society. We depend so much on the earth and on the moisture and on the heavens. And that prayer was somehow contained in that shaking ritual of the Omer. And then for the rabbis, of course, it became about a different kind of journey, because Pesach is known as Man Cheirutenu, the season of our freedom, the exodus from Egypt. And the Shavuot, which is the 50th day, is known as Man Matan Toratenu, which is the season of us receiving the Torah. So instead of counting days between one harvest and another, we're counting days between freedom and the ultimate expression of freedom, which is, from the Jewish perspective, is making a covenant to receive and to uphold this Torah, which is what Shavuot is for us in modern celebrations of Shavuot. And then, of course, for the Kabbalists, those days have a whole different meaning. Today is Yesod Shebahod. Today is the 34th day of the Omer, making 4 weeks and 6 days. And the week of Hod, the whole 5th week of the Omer, is known as Hod, which in Kabbalah is about connected to Aaron HaKohen, connected to Aaron the high priest. And it's really about splendor and transparent. Reb Zalman used to translate it as transparency. It's about this idea that, in a sense, the real light shines through when I get myself and my ego out of the way and just allowing and appreciating. Hod is like Hodaya, it's like thanksgiving. It's about the capacity to be able to just appreciate what is, and do that not through the work of Netzach, which is the week before, which is connected to Aaron's brother Moshe, which is about endurance and survival and victory. And Hod's about, I step back and I sort of bathe in the glory of what is. And so Lag BaOmer is Hod Shebahod. Lag BaOmer is Hod of Hod, the 33rd day of the Omer. And Lag, of course, is a gematria. Lamed is 30 and Gimel is 3. So Lag is really spelling 33, which is the 33rd day of the Omer. According to the Talmud, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died in a plague. Yes, 24,000 students died in a plague. There's all kinds of explanations about why they died, but Lag BaOmer was when the plague stopped. And so it's a break in the morning. For many people, the Omer period is a period of semi-mourning, and the break happens on Lag BaOmer because that's when the plague stopped. And how horribly, horribly ironic that was the day that this tragedy happened. And this idea that we've been living through a plague, and we've been living through this plague for so long. And in a sense, our celebration here was like, it's a break in the plague. We can be outside, we can be by fire, we can celebrate together. And so that's one of the reasons of Lag BaOmer is celebrating that break. But there's a beautiful teaching that I taught at the bonfire, which I learned from our wonderful, wonderful friend and teacher, Mori Yehudis, who teaches it in the name of Bonai Shalom, which is a Hasidic text. And the first 30, the Omer can be separated into the first 32 days and then the last 17 days. 32, the 32nd day of the Omer is Lev BaOmer. The 33rd day is Lag BaOmer, but 32 is Lev, which is the heart. And so, according to this teaching, the first 32 days of the Omer are all about the work we do, the internal work that we do, to purify our own hearts, to get ourselves ready for this receiving of Torah. And the last 17 days after Lag BaOmer, so there's the days before and then there's the days including Lag BaOmer afterwards, which is 17. And 17 in Gematria, in Hebrew numerology, spells Tov. So that all 49 days together spell Lev Tov. And the whole ultimate goal of the Omer is to receive a Lev Tov, to get a good heart, to be a good heart, to embody a good heart, to have so much kindness and compassion in our hearts, and to do that work of the Omer, Lev Tov. And then Mori Yehudis also shared another teaching from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which is about the bow and arrow, because one of the rituals of Lag BaOmer is a lot of kids will have little toy bows and arrows. Why? We don't really know why. The explanation that I think is most plausible is that when the Romans made it illegal to publicly study and teach and read from the Torah under the Roman occupation, which is when a lot of these stories were set, Rabbi Akiva and other great rabbis defied the Romans and said, I'm going to go teach Torah because that's our essence, that's our water, that's how we live, that's how we breathe, that's how we survive. And they would go into the forests and secretly teach Torah, and the students would come dressed as hunters with their bows and arrows, and they would learn while they were pretending to hunt, they would actually be secretly listening to the teachings of the Torah. But the bow, according to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, if you think about a bow and a bow and arrow, the teaching is the further back you pull the bow, the farther the arrow is going to go. And the way the Lubavitcher Rebbe understands that is the deeper we work on ourselves on the inside, the further our reach in the world can go on the outside, which I think is such a powerful teaching. And it's for this time of year where we're in this weird transition time. We're together, we're not together. It's over, it's not over. We're here, we're not here. We're present, we're absent. All of the paradoxes that exist. And all of this like Lev Tov and Lag BaOmer. So the other thing about Lag BaOmer that's so important, which connects to the tragedy that happened, is that one of the great Talmudic sages known as Rashbi or Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who according to some people was the author of the Zohar, the main book of Kabbalah, although most scholars think it was a much later text. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried on Mount Maron. And his Chilula, for the Sephardim, his yard site for the Ashkenazim, the anniversary of his death is Lag BaOmer. It's his yard site. And for a tzaddik, a yard site is a day of great celebration. It's this idea that we connect to the essence of who they are, the essence of their teaching, the essence of what they brought into the world. And so what happens on Lag BaOmer for many of the Haredi, and it really is almost entirely Haredi, ultra-Orthodox people who go to Miron on Lag BaOmer these days, but it's this pilgrimage to go to this mountain where in a cave is the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and go there and celebrate and take little kids who have their first haircut and to light bonfires and to celebrate all of the things that Lag BaOmer has become. But it's a mountain, and mountains can be treacherous. And 100,000 Haredim not prepared with proper shoes or equipment or anything else to go and climb a mountain to get to a grave. We see what happens. But the Torah, in this cycle of telling us to count the days, is telling us to mark time. And what does it mean to mark time? There's the very powerful verse from Psalm 90, which has become part of our liturgy for Yizkor, with the very last verse of Psalm 90 says, Linot yameinu kein hoda v'navo levev chokhmah. Teach us to count our days in the right kind of way, so that we can obtain a levav chokhmah, a wise heart. We talked about the Omer being about a lev tov, a good heart. But counting our days gives us a wise heart. What does it mean to have a wise heart, to be hacham lev? What does it mean to be wise-hearted? And of course, so much of the teaching, and I've said this before, it's not about counting our days, but it's about making our days count. So much of the time during COVID, one day felt very similar to the next day. You know, we didn't put on pants for days at a time. We didn't leave our couches for days at a time. You know, we didn't leave our computer screens for days at a time. And it was like hard to separate one day from the other. And the beauty of this Parsha that we read today is about the importance of marking time through a sacred calendar, which is what the Torah is doing in Parshat Emor, like counting those sacred times and recognizing them. For me, certainly, and I hope for many of us, the cycle of the holidays was what made these really difficult and sometimes meaningless days filled with meaning. The fact that every week, and the first holiday that the Torah mentions is Shabbat, right? And then it goes into Pesach, and then it goes into counting the Omer, and then it goes into Shavuot, and it goes into Sukkot. These are very, very important holidays. Lag BaOmer, of course, is not mentioned because that's a later holiday, a later idea. But the fact that every week we can say, now it's Shabbat. The fact that through the year, and who knew that we would be celebrating not one but two Pesachs and pretty much two Shavuots. Shavuot is not going to be like a normal Shavuot. We're still going to be mostly distance from each other, and Shavuot's coming up soon. But regardless of how we celebrate it, the calendar is such a clear invitation to us to say, don't just count days, make days count. Don't just count days, make days count. Observe these sacred holidays. And we can understand, like if you really feel in your heart, in the deepest possible way, that the Torah and therefore the will of God, however we might understand the will of God, wants us to mark time in these special ways in community, you can understand the passion and the fervor that happens with people wanting to celebrate their holidays in ways that can risk life and that did risk life. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, fulfilling my commitment to Gali to mention Rabbi Jonathan Sacks every week, in his incredible book, Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas, this essay is actually called In the Diary, which to Americans, a diary is very different to what it is to, for English people, a diary is basically a calendar. But I know for Americans, it's something else. So he says in the diary, but what he really talks about is like the difference between a to-do list and a diary, or a to-do list and a calendar. Don't just make a list of the things you have to do. Mark in your calendar when the times come where you need to stop and think about the world in a different way. So in the conclusion of the essay, well, first of all, he quotes someone called Leon Cass, who said that still people still hope to find meaning in their lives, but they're increasingly confused about what a worthy life might look like and about how they might be able to live one, which is so true, right? We want lives that are constructed with meaning, but we don't know quite how to give our lives meaning. And so what Jonathan Sacks says is, hence the life-changing magic of the Jewish calendar, the life-changing magic of the Jewish calendar. Philosophy seeks timeless truths. Judaism, by contrast, takes truths and translates them into time in the form of sacred shared moments when we experience the great truths by living them. So whatever you want to achieve, write it in the diary, or it will not happen. And live by the Jewish calendar if you want to experience, not just occasionally think about, the things that give life a meaning. So that's Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's life-changing idea. I think it's the Torah's life-changing idea in this parsha, that even in these days where life can feel meaningless, we construct meaning through living according to a sacred calendar. And we also know that sometimes faith can, if it's extreme, can lead to danger. And so even though many of us want to live a Jewish life and uphold Jewish values and uphold Jewish rituals and Jewish holidays, we do so in a way where we're constantly thinking about our safety as individuals and as families and ultimately as a community. So yes, we're going to celebrate time, but we're not going to be crazy about it. And yes, we absolutely honor the memory of those 45 people who lost their lives, many of them so young, and we honor their memory. But we also send a little prayer to that community that, please God, they should make better choices and keep each other safer, and not just have some kind of reliance on some greater authority that allows them to ignore the authority of what their local officials and governments are telling them to do. And so it's a complicated prayer in a certain way, but may the memories of those whose lives were lost be for a blessing, and may those whose hearts are broken be healed, and may their communities in the future make choices that honor and protect and preserve life, because the Torah says, Chai b'hem, live by them. We're supposed to live by the values of the Torah, not die by the values of the Torah. So may we, on this sacred time, this moed of Shabbat, may we be renewed and have our hearts filled up a little bit more by not just counting this day, but making this day count as yet another Shabbat in this extraordinary cycle of time which we've been living through. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.